This part of the course is entitled What Went Wrong Troubleshooting JavaScript. The reality of writing code is that even experienced developers don't just automatically write problem-free code the first time around, at least not most of the time. Generally, the first time we write something, there are probably going to be a few issues, and those issues are going to be communicated to us in the case of writing web apps through the console in the browser. This makes it very straightforward to troubleshoot what exactly is going wrong and providing the relevant fix. Now, to help us with this, we've been provided a document that contains another copy of the number guessing game, but there are deliberate errors introduced into the JavaScript. Our objective is to see how these errors manifest themselves in the developer pane and how we can go about systematically fixing bugs or errors in our code. So step one here is to open the Dev Tools. Taking a look in the console tab, we can see immediately that we have an error, uncaught type error, getSubmit.addEventListener is not a function. Now that narrows things down. We know it's something to do with getSubmit.addEventListener, but the thing that really allows us to pinpoint the problem is the reference to the precise location in the code where this error is occurring. So first of all, it tells us this is in the guesses_errors.html document, line 87, character 19. That's very specific. So here is line 87 in the code. We know we're adding an event listener to the getSubmit HTML element, but there's a problem with the way that add event listener has been written. This E should actually be capitalized. So this is something that's referred to as a syntax error. The way we've typed the code is simply incorrect. All we need to do in this case is capitalize the E on add event listener. Now, when we refresh the page, we no longer get that error appearing in the JavaScript DevTools console. Okay, let's test out our game and see if it works. Let's start by making a guess at the guessing game. Choose submit guess. Paying attention to the JavaScript console, we can see another error. Uncaught type error, low or high is null. And we can see that this is occurring on line 79 of the code. Now, if we take a look at line 79, low or high.text content equals last guess was too high. This line of code actually looks correct. The problem is actually with that low or high value. It hasn't been assigned correctly. Now, we can make use of the JavaScript function console.log to log various pieces of information to the DevTools. For example, if we type console.log and pass the value of low or high, we can see we get undefined returned here. You can use console log from within JavaScript code as well, but as you can see, it's also possible to use it here directly in the DevTools. It's very good for echoing out pieces of information such as variables to see if they contain the values that you would expect. In this case, we can see that low or high doesn't contain the value we'd expect. We're expecting it to be a DOM node HTML element, but it's actually undefined. So let's return to the point in the code where low or high is initially defined. When we take a look at line 51, we can see it's making use of document.querySelector, and it's targeting the string low or high, but it's supposed to be targeting a CSS class, which we indicate with the dot at the beginning of the string. So you can see that low or high does not have a dot at the beginning of the string, so this is actually returning undefined in this case. We can see that although the error mentioned to us in the DevTools was actually at line 79, that line in the code was okay. It's line 51 that has a problem. So you can see that the errors in the DevTools often give us a starting point, but that doesn't mean that that's always the precise line where the error occurs. Now, after refreshing the page, everything seems to work at this stage. The next problem is going to occur when we get to the end of the game. So let's complete a single playthrough of the game. And if we take a look at the DevTools, we get the error message, reset button.addEventListener is not a function. We can see straight away this is another occurrence of that E not being capitalized in addEventListener. This is occurring on line 95 in the JavaScript. These are some of the most common types of bugs, by the way. Nothing serious, just a small missing character, something's been misspelled, or maybe missing capitalization. You can see it's very easy to go through and fix each of these, making use of the error messages in the DevTools. Now, everything we've seen so far is an example of a syntax error. The JavaScript is fundamentally broken, and the browser is able to tell us on which specific line of the JavaScript there is some kind of issue with the syntax. So that's the first type of error. The second type of error, it's a little bit more insidious. It's something that's referred to as a logic error. The idea with a logic error is that in terms of the syntax, the code is completely fine. It's just that the code doesn't necessarily do what the developer expects it to do. For example, in the number guessing game, we expect the random number to be a random number between 1 and 100. Did you find it a strange coincidence that the answer to this game was specifically 1? I suppose it could happen, but it seems unlikely. What we find out here is that the answer is always 1. This random number is not being assigned correctly. So we're not getting any kind of syntax error in the dev tools. This is actually a problem with the logic of our code. We're going to need to find out where this logic problem is occurring. We're not going to get given a line number for this because essentially the JavaScript is 100% correct, just doesn't do what we want it to do. It is fairly straightforward to find the snippet of code that generates the random number. It's set using math.floor, so we know this is a rounding down function in JavaScript. It's going to round down a floating point number to the nearest whole integer, and it's rounding down the value of math random. And remember, math.random is actually generating a floating point number between 0 and 0.9999 recurring. In other words, it's always less than 1. So if we add 1 to the result of math random and then round down to the nearest whole integer, we're always going to get 1 as a result here. We actually don't want math.random to be a floating point number between 0 and 1. We actually want it to be a number between 0 and 99. And in order to do that, we need to first of all multiply that floating point number by 100. Now, something that's important to keep in mind here is that this is used to initialize the random number, but the random number gets reinitialized when we reset the game, so there could be another piece of faulty logic somewhere in this code. So here we go inside the reset game function. We have that same JavaScript snippet where math.random has not been correctly multiplied by 100. So now at this stage, let's just confirm the answer is not still 1, although I guess it could be 1 in 100. So it seems like we probably fixed the game at this stage. Let's just complete a playthrough. It's definitely above 50. It's exactly 75 in this case. If we reinitialize the game, hopefully the answer is not going to be 75. So it seems, for all intents and purposes, that we fixed that particular issue with the JavaScript logic. Now, if we take a look at the MDN web docs, it gives us a list of other very common errors. Advanced programmers make these same errors. It's usually just a case of a typo. It's not that they don't understand why it's incorrect JavaScript. It's just very easy to press the wrong key from time to time. During our guessing game logic, one of the things we do is compare the user guess to the random number to see if it's the same. And you can see we have 3 equal signs. This tests to see if user guess is strictly equal to the random number. What would happen if we just included a single equal sign? This happens all of the time in my experience. Well, this is no longer actually checking to see if user guess equals random number. When we have a single equals, this is actually an assignment operator. In other words, we're setting the value of user guess to the random number. So not only does it change the value of user guess, but it also always evaluates to true. So anything within the function block is going to be executed, basically causes the program to report that the game has been won every single time. So when we are comparing 2 values as part of an if statement, we either need 2 equals or 3 equals, but a single equals is actually an assignment operator in JavaScript. Here's another common error, syntax error, missing right function scope after argument list. This one is pretty simple. It generally means you've missed the closing parenthesis at the end of a function method call. Syntax error, missing colon after property ID. So this error usually relates to an incorrectly formed JavaScript object, but sometimes you can get this error message when you're not even trying to make use of an object. For example, the MDN web docs list how this particular error was generated. So imagine we are defining a function checkGuess. We have our function scopes, and then the function goes within inside these curly brackets. What if we miss the right bracket of the function scope? Now JavaScript is actually expecting us to pass a JavaScript object as a parameter, typically something referred to as a destructured object. But of course, since we don't actually do that, we end up getting the error message missing colon after property ID. So colon, something that's used to separate the key value pairs as part of an object. So JavaScript is expecting an object. We don't provide it. We get an error message to that effect. Missing right curly bracket after function body. Remember, as we define a function check yes, we have the logic, then we need the closing right bracket. If we don't provide that, we'll get missing curly right bracket after function body. Finally, syntax error expected expression got string, where string will be replaced by what the code actually received. So this particular family of errors is related to handling of strings. We know that strings in JavaScript need to have an open quote and a closing quote. Could be a single quote, could be a double quote, could be a backtick. The point is strings always exist within those two bounds. If one of them is missing, the opening quote of the string or the closing quote mark of the string, then we end up with a string that hasn't been terminated correctly. We end up getting one of these types of errors. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but keep in mind this is the advantage of the MDN web docs. For example, check out this note. See our syntax error unexpected token, and syntax error string literal contains an unescaped line break reference pages for more details about these errors. So if you really wanted to do a deep dive on errors in JavaScript, you have all of the tools you need at your disposal with the MDN web docs. Having said that, in most cases, this is something that you will learn as you go along, so you don't have to do this preemptively. What we've looked at in this session is definitely enough to get you started with understanding how to interpret errors, how to troubleshoot JavaScript, and make systematic fixes to your code. So there we have it, the basics of figuring out errors in simple JavaScript programs. It won't always be that simple to work out what's wrong in your code, but at least this will save you a few hours of sleep and allow you to progress a bit faster when things don't turn out right, especially in the earlier stages of your learning journey.